So the relationship between mental health and rehab programs is a fine line between the treatment plans that target the difference in patients and how a plan would be implemented. One of the biggest components that any treatment is actually effective towards is in a long-term care solution. With any given patient, once in a facility, there's a typical lockdown kind of period with a super high control from the staff, doctors, whatever. But once that's over, you're basically free to resort back to those habits, whether that's substance abuse or forms of self-sabotaging behaviors. There's always some form of relapse that no one really has a say over. So with kids in high school, a lot of that impact comes from the community that's built around illnesses and bonding so closely over that pain. In relationships like those, it can become a codependent and intervalidated cycle of bringing one another back to square one. Especially in the environments like New York City high schools, the consequences of substance abuse and cycling back to bad habits is really hard to do alone, so most choose not to. Substance abuse and self-sabotaging behaviors are largely competitive through youth, just based on institutional environments alone, fighting for some form of external recognition and help, which is almost impossible to achieve because of how normalized extreme illnesses are. That search of comfort is what drives so many towards a really desperate path, and in many ways will always be an instinct or last resort. High school is a majorly formative time in a child's life, and the impacts of easily accessible drugs is just growing. The main treatments that are implemented into facilities for substance abuse and mental health care are just different forms of verbal therapy. The next step is a huge jump to these really intense medications like benzos and SSRIs, which have really long-term implications for mental health and physical dependence. These care plans are still short-term sobriety treatments and barely touch the mental aspects of things, with seemingly no comprehension of the growing access to substances through New York City high schools. With the government's blind and normalized perception of these drugs, it makes a lot of sense that other drugs wouldn't seem as effective or bad. By normalizing such a number of youth on medications, it also influences a mix of prescription drugs or other illicit drugs. These are all examples of cycles that affect the addictive nature of youth environments, which the government has little to no effect on. My experience in a mental hospital was really interesting, majorly because of the competitive nature of these illnesses. As soon as you're admitted, it's like a group interrogation of how you were placed there, by the ER or if you were self-admitted. It's a group assumption over how you were ranked, basically. Everyone in a lot of ways just wants to one-up each other, and it's really just a fight to be taken seriously. Although at the same time, everyone's trying to get out as soon as possible and trying to prove themselves as well, which highly contradicts the group narrative. It's a constant battle, so once again, you just have to get your safety plan, and it really isn't binding after you leave. So you're just free to go back to anything that you were up to before being admitted. There's a lot of cases with kids where they'll be deemed unfit by their school from basically their parents saying that this school does not have the resources or accommodation that my kid needs to be able to work in this school. So you'll have to sue the DOE, and usually they'll set you up with a DOE lawyer, and they'll set you up with a bunch of different schools run by the DOE. You'll have to be denied by every single one of those schools to go to the school that you want to go to, and so that they give you the funding that you need to go to that school. But if you don't have the resources or money to be denied by those schools, you could be set up there. And I've toured a bunch of these schools, and in most cases, they have not enough teachers, not enough staff. It's completely run down. If you walk in, I've had this before so many times, where you walk in and there's kids being physically restrained in the hallways, screaming run, you have to run, it's not okay here, which is really wild, but it happens a lot. There's so many of these schools in upstate New York or near Long Island where they just do not have the resources to keep these schools running, and it's a lot of times kids struggling with substance abuse, and they just don't have the resources to do anything. So they'll be smoking in the hallways or something, and they just gave up because they need to just graduate these kids and get the next batch. But if you have enough money to get a lawyer and fight for what you need, then you can be placed in a school that's more well known, more has the resources, and is actually a running sustainable school. But in a lot of cases, if you're not fit to be at a certain school, you're kind of just fucked.